Welcome in, everyone. Welcome to a new episode. I'm very excited for this week's guest, and I want to welcome Sarah Ann and have her introduce herself. And so, welcome. Tell us who you are and what you do.
Hi, Buzu Ani. My name is Sarah Ann Tourond. I am a lot of things. I am a award-nominated children's author and illustrator. I am a yoga teacher, a meditation guide. I do public speaking, and I am a wellness consultant and facilitator for Indigenous communities, and an advocate for Indigenous wellness. I am from Gambler First Nation in Treaty 4. I am Ojibwe, Anishinaabe, and Métis from, I'm Red River Métis, sorry. And I belong to the Eagle Clan. Native introductions are always like 8 minutes long.
Welcome.
I think, and I'm a mother to a 4-year-old who inspires a lot of my books, to be honest, and a lot of the work that I do.
Yeah. Welcome. So I'm curious, as you wear all of these hats, what is that like? Just as far as the responsibility to not only family, to self, but also community. Like you're really out there in the community. What has that been like for you? What led you there?
Well, getting right into it, but I
Yeah.
lost my mom to suicide when I was a month shy of 3. And
Mm,
so for me, my entire life was kind of built upon that and
mm,
um, that loss. And I know, let me just backtrack. Okay, so I started doing this work because of how my life was affected by my mom's suicide,
mhm,
and just how many people focused on her death instead of her life, and
mm,
also how I grew up kind of in a small town where there was a lot of pity for me because of that loss.
mhm,
And for me, I really wanted to alchemize the pain from that loss into change,
mm,
because the one of the leading causes of death in Indigenous communities is suicide. So for me, instead of dwelling on my own pain, I wanted to alchemize it into creating change and possibly changing that statistic, so that we stop losing so many of our youth, so many of our people to suicide. So I started working in wellness because for me growing up, one of the biggest things that kind of kept me alive was sports and art. And so now I share movement through yoga and art through my books and the workshops that I do with kids as a way to empower people in their own wellness journeys and to remind them that they have gifts. I think that's something that colonization has kind of um, dampened in people. It's kind of put this shame around talking about the things that you're good at. People
mhm.
are really good at talking about the things that they need to improve upon, on the
Yes.
things that they're not good at. And I think that we need to start looking at our gifts that we all carry, because we all carry unique gifts, and there's a reason why we were given them, and it's to make the world a better place. So just to bring people into that understanding and into that relationship with themselves to start to cultivate some self love in
Mm,
themselves, self-worth. Yeah.
yeah. I'm curious what your journey with self-worth, self-love has been like.
Mm.
I definitely can understand and empathize when um, maybe there's a perception around how you're even supposed to process deep grief.
Yeah.
And so it sounds like you really have found your own identity and how you want to hold that and how you want to move through that and move into the joy, move into the
Mhm.
gifting. So what was that journey like for you? How did you
I mean, it's
say?
an ongoing daily journey,
Yeah.
to be honest. Some days
Yeah.
are easier than others. Um, I think for me in finding self-love, it's remembering that I have purpose, not necessarily in my productivity, but that everything that I've experienced in my life can be used to make the world a better place. And my self-worth, I mean, I don't know how healthy it is, but my self-worth really lies in creating change, in bringing joy into people's lives, and to remember a lot of our Indigenous teachings, which are that, you know, a flower isn't like, oh man, I'm not doing enough. What I'm not doing enough, I'm not worthy of being here, right? It's and just like that, we're living things. The flowers are our relations, and they are good teachers to remind us that we don't need to do anything. There's nothing that we need to do. There's nothing that we need to improve upon to have worth and to be sacred. Just in our very existence, we are. So I try to remind myself that of those teachings of that, you know, that we just exist in sacredness, that we just exist in worth. There's nothing to do or improve on to create that. It just is.
Mm. Do you feel like that was spoken into you at an early age? Those
No,
teachings or
definitely
like
not.
yeah, like
I
did
didn't
you
really grow up in a very supportive environment. So honestly, I guess the self-worth, the self-love that I've had to cultivate has had to come really only from within. Um, I yeah, there wasn't I didn't grow up in a very supportive environment in my gifts and in uh uh yeah, my worth. Let's just say that the love that I received growing up was very conditional.
mm, yeah.
So when I started to it took a long time, and it honestly, I would say up like in the past 5 years is when it's really started to when I've really started to feel grounded in that self-worth and in that self-love. And a lot of it does come from like my movement practices, being
Mm,
active, um, creating art.
mhm.
And
Yeah.
yeah, so yeah, no, it wasn't instilled in me growing up, but I do think for me, one of the things as a parent that's important is to instill that in my son growing up. We do affirmations every morning when we get
Nice.
ready, and that's another thing for me that's it's healing for me to give that to my son, that those that affirmation, that love, that um instilling self-worth that no one did for me growing up.
Mhm. Well, it's like changing that intergenerational
Yeah, exactly.
holding. Yeah,
Mhm.
absolutely. Um, there's such a resiliency in you, and I'm wondering where maybe that really was fostered. Was it in sports? Was it in
Hmm.
art? Was it in
Um, I think it was out of survival, honestly, growing up.
yeah.
That resiliency is not, I wish I didn't have to have it, to be honest,
Yeah.
but I
Yeah.
think that it was just built um, over surviving, over, I think growing up before I had more self-awareness, it was just uh, almost out of um, the the deep want to just not end up like my mom, and just to have I needed to build that resiliency to live, honestly.
Mhm.
So now that I've gotten older and it's not out of survival, for me, I get to use that resiliency to build it in other people, and
Mhm.
to set an example that you can, for Indigenous youth or even Indigenous women, that it doesn't matter where you come from, that that strength is within you. And I think if there's Indigenous people listening to this, you just kind of it's that ancestral strength that we carry. That resiliency is a part of our DNA. We
Mhm.
in order for us to survive here, right, we survived genocide as Indigenous people here on Turtle Island, and that resiliency is just built into our DNA now in order for us to still be here.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely 100%, right? When we think about what ancestors had to go through in order to um, keep that lineage and have us be here today. They
Mhm,
had to endure so much, and even we go back one generation, and the things that they had to endure and tolerate, mental health
mhm.
and addiction and colonization and all of the systemic trauma,
Yeah.
even the internalized racism.
Mhm,
It's pretty wild, right? And then I think of our generation and the generations forward, and we are really, really, really trying to create something different and create that space that is less out of survival and more in thrive.
mhm. And
So,
that's my
yeah.
goal in my work
Mhm.
is to, I think there's a lot of focus on our trauma and, and sadness as Indigenous people. And even when I work in schools and I speak in schools, that's what they learn in schools. And I mean, it's an improvement from when I was in school because we didn't learn
Mhm.
anything. But
Mhm.
all that they're taught is about the effects of residential school and colonization. But we don't. There's not a lot of conversations around who we were pre-colonization and the joy that we carry as Indigenous people. The funniest people I know are Indigenous people. We carry a lot of joy. Our culture is so beautiful, and I think for me and a lot of Indigenous people who are creating that intergenerational healing are is that we I know for myself is that understanding that I'm not just living my life for me, I'm living my life for the healing of the next 7 generations that follow me. So I have a responsibility to be resilient and to
Mhm.
continue to love myself because that is the healing that I'm integrating into my bloodlines that come after me.
Mhm. Absolutely.
Mhm.
I think there is a big gap between how focused we are on improvement and trauma and sadness and the impact of that. Oftentimes, it feels very imbalanced with the joy and the happiness and the things that we're striving for in that healing, right? But it's this idea of like, are we going to let ourselves have that healing? Are we going to live out of that? Are we going to bring in joy? Are we going to bring in self love intentionally? Self compassion. And I really hear that in your journey and in your story, where you really have set strong intention around who you want to be and how you want to live, not only for yourself, but also for your children and community. And you're
Mhm.
calling that in.
Yeah. I mean, I try. Some days I feel like I'm not setting the best example and it's really difficult. But I think it is those glimmers in every day. It's finding gratitude when I think for me that was the biggest key in all of this is
Mm.
finding gratitude even in those hard days where where I barely had 2 pennies to rub together and just finding gratitude for the warmth of the sun or um anything and building off of that. And I think so the mission of my work is to teach people to take care of themselves so we can take care of each other so we can work together to take care of the earth just as she does us. And that starts with building self-worth in people because if people don't feel like they're worth taking care of themselves, then we have nowhere to start.
Mhm. Yeah. And I think I see that so frequently as a therapist where
Mhm,
people haven't really even allowed themselves the idea of self-worth, right? They
yeah.
live out of what has been given to them, right? So we talk often about like you have a choice, you have power to say yes or no to things. You have choice and power to accept or reject other people's offering to you. Like, what is it that you really want for not only others, but also for yourself? And that's like mind blowing because in our culture and society, we so often live for others, and that's the distraction, right? But when we
Mhm,
really sit with ourselves, it's like, well, what do you want? What do you need? What do you want to feel in your body? And it does start with gratitude. Even
mhm.
this morning before I left, I sometimes will do an exercise with my husband of like, okay, what are the 3 things we're grateful for? Like, what kind of day are we gonna have today?
Yeah.
And it can be hard to get into that headspace when you are feeling low or you're struggling. But there is a viable shift that happens when you change your mindset and your body state, and it really begins with you. I wholeheartedly agree with that.
Mhm. Mhm. And
Yeah.
I like to, what you just said, I like to almost lean into that when I do that work of because there is so much selflessness and people are motivated by giving to others,
Mhm.
is bringing them to the understanding that if you are an empty cup, what do you have to give?
Oh,
So
yeah.
it's like that reframing of their mindset of like, oh, well, yeah, if I'm not taking care of myself, I actually am not giving to my community, to my family at the highest capacity that I can be. And I think that that helps people who are in that mindset um, have a different perspective on self-care, because I think a lot of people have the perception that self-care is selfish. But
Mhm.
I think that that's also colonization's view of self-care, because self-care isn't like taking baths and I mean it is, but to me self-care is discipline and is surrounding yourself with people who tell you the truth even when you don't want to hear it, um and and having compassion with yourself, and also like thinking of your future self, not just your present self. Like, yeah, a bath is great for right now, but what am I doing to take care of Sarah Ann next year, next week, 5 years down the line, right? So
Yeah.
making those daily practices about future self-care as well.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Even the other day I had I had worked a long day and I sat down and I was eating dinner and I was like, oh, I'm so grateful that I thought of like future self and that I made this dinner prior so that
Yeah.
I could just sit down and eat and be nourished and then go to bed, you know? So it is in the tiny, tiny things. It doesn't have to cost money. It doesn't
Mhm.
have to be this luxurious thing. It can even be in like, reaching out to a friend and being like, hey, this thing is coming up. I need you to check in on me. Right.
Mhm.
And like, who do I have in my circle who can really show up in a way of helpful, supportive, joyful community,
Yeah.
and that begins with starting with yourself. And especially as women, I work with a lot of women who perinatal, postnatal, and it's like those are some of the hardest years of your life. And so you have to have a strong circle who can be like, hey, I know this is going on, or I know this even period or season of your life is going to be difficult, and just know you well enough because you know yourself well enough to be able to say like, I need you to show up, or they just show up, you
Yeah.
know. Um,
Yeah.
so
And that's, I think, one of the most difficult things about colonization is how challenging it can be to build that community around you,
mhm.
because we're all so busy,
Yeah.
um and so I really think, especially for myself where I don't have a lot of familial support, is the gratitude that I have for the people that I have um been privileged enough to surround myself with is so immense, because um I really believe that you are the equivalent of the people that, like the equivalent of like the 11 people that you spend the most time with.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I am so fortunate to be surrounded by a lot of women who really support me, who see me and don't perceive me. And I find that that's something feel a lot is perceived, especially when people
Mhm.
hear my story. I think they expect me to be a certain way.
Yeah.
Um, but I'm surrounded by women who are supportive, who inspire me, and who tell me the truth when I don't want to hear it. And I think that that is so important, especially when you start moving into maybe higher levels of like colonial measures of success. I think it's really important
Mhm.
to have people around you that keep you grounded in what your intentions are, and
Mhm.
also like what your purpose is and your why. Why are you doing this? What is your why? And making sure that people who know you well enough to keep you aligned with your highest, greatest self.
Mhm. Oh,
Yeah,
absolutely.
it's invaluable, honestly.
Yeah. And I mean, this is relatable, but like you wear so many hats. So I imagine
Yeah.
it can be hard at times to stay grounded. Um, you
Okay,
know,
grounding isn't my strength.
like, yeah.
It's not one of my strengths.
Yeah. So
I'm like the
have
queen of chaos over here.
yeah, yeah, yes. Have you seen those memes where it's like, you know, the chaotic friend and like how they always come in and
Yeah,
it's pretty
yeah,
funny. Like I'm like, yeah, that's me.
yeah. Yeah.
Um, yeah. How I'm curious, like what your first exposure to yoga was. Like how did you get into yoga, meditation? Like,
So, I forgot to mention one of the other things I do. I was an RMT and am still an RMT, a registered massage therapist. And
mm,
um, when I was working as a massage therapist, I started doing yoga to take care of my own mental health. I was working in a pretty um, high profile place which is funny because I was a massage therapist, but I was working with high
like what does
profile
that mean?
athletes. With
Okay. Okay.
yeah, I was working with like high profile athletes in a sports medicine environment.
Oh,
And there was a lot of imposter syndrome that I was experiencing that because
mm,
I'm with these other professionals who, you know, sports medicine doctors and um, athletic therapists and physiotherapists and people who were at the top of their um, like leading service providers in their spaces, right? Or whatever you want to
mm-hmm,
say. And I was fresh out of school and I
mm,
was experiencing anxiety attacks for the first time in my life. And
mm,
looking back, it was like a buildup of a lot of other things why I was experiencing that. So I started practicing yoga. And it was also from a very physical standpoint as well of increasing flexibility, all these types of things, coming from like an athletic background. That's my default approach is always from a physical approach. And then I started
yeah.
practicing and then continued because of how it affected my mental health.
Mm,
And then so I realized how it could benefit my clients if I took a yoga teacher training, because then I could provide them care between their appointments by giving them tools to take care of themselves. Because people come to you as a massage therapist for many things, right? Musculoskeletal injuries, uh, to lower stress levels. Some people just need to be touched, honestly, because we
mhm.
lack that. I could go on and on about that. And
Yes.
society, we're not like making human contact like we should. So when
Yeah.
I took my first yoga teacher training, it was from a almost a clinical standpoint of, oh well, this is going to expand the rehab, the um, exercises, the tools I can give my clients so that they're not just depending on me
Mm,
to take care of all of their injuries in an hour. And then I took my first yoga teacher training and it opened up this whole other realm of meditation and mindfulness and breath work that
mhm.
I yeah had no idea about. I was so green in that yoga teacher training. I had no idea what I got myself into, but
Yeah.
yeah.
I think of like the swing, like the polarity of, you know, this high paced, busy colonial setting versus like a slower, more intentional,
Yeah.
um, more decolonized in some spaces. That's a whole
Yeah.
nother tangent. But
Yeah.
you know, it's a big shift. It's a big swing. How did your body, how did your nervous system do with that, like slowing down?
Not well. When I started as a yoga teacher,
Big
I
shift.
really focused into the vinyasa, which is
The
like that really quick flow
yeah,
yoga.
you're like
Um,
sweating out of
yeah,
breath. You're
sweating,
like,
and it was
what am I
still very
doing?
physical. I think it's like
Yeah.
coming from that sports background and having that be my saving grace my whole life. It's always
Mhm.
how it's honestly the first layer I approach everything with.
Mhm. Mhm.
And yeah, so that swing into doing that. But I've always loved, even when I was a kid, being in front of people. And I used to be ashamed of that, like being called an attention seeker, but now I
Mm.
embrace it because I know it's one of my gifts. Like there's so many people that would love to be able to be so comfortable talking in front of, you know, hundreds and
Oh,
hundreds of people. And
yes.
it's just like it's easy. I love it. And
Yeah.
so I started teaching vinyasa yoga. And then I took a yoga nidra meditation training,
Mm.
which really changed my own life, honestly. So yoga nidra, if you're not familiar, is I've taken the iRest training,
Mm.
and then also through like a yoga perspective. And iRest is done by it's through like a therapy lens, and it's for
Mhm.
people with PTSD, and it's a really great way of um, moving through the trauma that's held in your body and in your memory in a really safe way.
Mm.
And so for me, yeah, my nervous system, I'm not good at being still. I also, if you can tell by how I talk, I have like pretty severe ADHD. I say I have like many tabs open in my brain at a time.
Yes.
But it's interesting. I've talked about this with my other yoga teacher friends, because when like now I mostly teach yin yoga, which is like you're
Very
still,
slow. You're like
very slow,
sleeping.
very still. Exactly. And people that meet me out in the world are like, how can you, like, I am not your stereotypical yoga teacher. Like, I talk a mile a minute, and I'm always got like 8 billion things in my arms and a billion tabs open, and I'm chaotic, right? And but then when I teach, it's it's like it's a gift to myself as well, because when
Mm.
I'm taking care and helping other people slow down, it grounds me, and also I feel the benefits of yoga nidra just by guiding it, of
Mm.
teaching yin and being in that environment and holding that space,
Mm.
helps to calm my own nervous system.
Mm.
Yeah, and so yeah, it's interesting. It's interesting having that awareness with your own self, your nervous system, your self-regulation skills, and having to teach it. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
I don't know if that answered your question.
it
Lots of
did.
tabs.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, and I was kind of curious, because yeah, I operate similarly, and I mean, not today, but I would love to have further conversation around yoga nidra because I'm really curious
Mhm,
around what your experience has been with self and with others, in that like trauma piece. That
mhm,
is fascinating because
mhm.
I've really only, I mean, I've heard the terminology, but I don't know a ton about it. I've done like vinyasa and yin, but I don't know that I've ever done more like
Yeah,
yoga
it's
nidra,
a
so I don't even know what that more
so it's
specifically is.
yeah, it's a guided meditation, and it takes you through it actually, the way I was taught, it takes you through the limbic system in the brain. So you start at the toes, and you work your way up through
Mm.
the different parts of the body, and it brings you into this state of awake, um like your body is asleep, but it's kind of hard to explain. It's almost like hypnotism, where
Okay.
it's like an awake sleep state. Yoga nidra means like yogic sleep, basically.
Okay.
um and in my experience, one of the ways, especially when I go out into Indigenous communities where people have experienced a lot of sexual trauma, who might not want to
Mm.
be touched in a massage, because that's mostly how I offer massage now, is in community. It's a really great way just for them to bring some awareness into their body that feels safe, because I think that's one of the
Mhm.
first steps with people who've experienced physical trauma, is just creating that feeling of safety in their body. And yoga nidra is a really great tool for that.
Mm.
Mm,
Mm. Yeah, that's fascinating and very, very aligned with like trauma informed care. And
mhm,
yeah, I love it. I,
mm.
yeah, I definitely would love to have further conversation around
Yeah,
that.
I have
Like,
a few friends who are therapists that practice it, and actually I have a lot of friends who were yoga teachers who've become therapists. It kind of seems to be like a direct
yeah,
uh bridge,
yeah.
but
It's
and a
like the
lot of them,
caretaking. Yeah,
yeah, exactly.
absolutely. Absolutely. Um, I'm very curious about your book. Can you tell,
Mhm.
as we're talking about all of this
Yeah.
self-care and slowing down, and then
Yeah.
your
Yeah.
book, You
So
Are Sacred.
yeah, I have my book, You Are Sacred, that is been out for about a year now.
Mm.
It was nominated for 2 awards. I don't even know if I've gotten one yet.
Congratulations.
um, so that's kind of, it's all been a very wild experience.
Yeah.
I wrote the book actually for my son. When I had my son, I was looking for Indigenous content books, and I couldn't find any that weren't sad. They were all kind of sad. And so
Yeah.
I wrote a book for him to teach him where to find healing before he knew what we were healing from as
Mm.
Indigenous people. Um, and it kind of snowballed from there. I self-published and ended up selling um, quite a few copies on my own, and then a publisher got a hold of it, my publisher, Strong Nations, and they wanted to turn it into a book series. based off of the medicine wheel, where you are sacred is represents the spiritual quadrant of the medicine wheel. And I think in colonial wellness, our spiritual wellness is often the first thing that's forgotten. We don't often include that in wellness. So for me, these books, and then my second book in the series called You Are the Land comes out this month, in September of 2024. And it's been this really interesting journey because I illustrate my books as well. And I have no training as an illustrator. So it's really been moving through a lot of imposter syndrome, a lot of reminding myself not to compare and embracing my own unique gifts. Like I preach to everybody else. So for me, these books have evolved from just being for my son to being for all children, not just Indigenous kids, because I really think that if we really want to see the systemic change that's needed for Indigenous people to heal and for reconciliation to occur, we really need to be focusing on the next generation coming together in this knowledge and not just offering it to Indigenous people. I mean, it's very important for us as Indigenous people to reconnect, but I think a lot of our teachings are important for everybody to know because of the state of, the climate affects us as humans. We aren't just living on the land, we're a part of it. And that's what my second book is about for kids. And so these books teach children that they can find everything they need within themselves and the land. And for me, when I wrote You Are Sacred, it was really healing for my own inner child because, like I said earlier, I didn't really have a lot of support. I didn't really ever feel seen. But one of the things I always had was I grew up on a farm and I could always go outside into the pasture, and I had this rock that I would sit on. And it was the only place, I think, looking back now and having a greater understanding of regulation, where I felt safe. And it was with the land, and we had a stream that went through the farmland that I grew up on, and I was always go out there, and I didn't even realize the significance of going to the water because I had no connection to my culture growing up. But I would always go out to the water and like speak my emotions to it. And so when I wrote You Are Sacred, it was to remind kids that, like we spoke about earlier, that there's nothing they need to do to be sacred. They just are. In Indigenous culture, we believe children are sacred because they are the closest to the spirit world. They come directly from the spirit world. And to just remind kids that. And one of the key components in my book is you don't see a lot of characters that there's a main character whose name is Sacred that we talk about, but there's no other human characters in the book. All the other characters in my books are elements in nature. So the wind is a character, the trees are characters, the rocks. And it's to bring kids into that who don't have that support. Like who had this similar experience to me growing up, who might not have an adult that they can go and get a hug from, or have an adult where they can speak their truth to, that they can always go and find that support in the land. So You Are Sacred speaks to the spiritual part of that, of not only can the land hold your spirit and tend to your spirit, but everything on earth has a spirit. And so it teaches kids about equity, equality, through an understanding that, I think a lot of times when we think about humility, for instance, we think about it from the angle of, well, I'm not better than anybody else. But it's also like, or that it's also like no one else is better than you, and it's that we're all equal, and that there's no, we can't compare to anything because we're all so unique. And I'm on a tangent. I'm a yapper.
Okay.
Yeah, You Are Sacred is about that. It's about having kids find that connection to land, because like I said earlier, we teach people to take care of themselves, to take care of each other, to take care of the land. And I think for me as a parent, one of the things that scares me the most is the state of the climate, because I can see a huge difference in the state of the land from even when I was a kid. For instance, like it was not normal for me growing up to see forest fires or the sun blocked by smoke every summer. And my son has seen that every single summer of his life. So, I might not see it in my lifetime, but I hope that these books and the messages that I'm putting out into the world affect the next generation enough that it brings them into that deep relationship with the land so that they understand that they're a part of it. And that when we take care of the land, you're taking care of yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah, so my second book, You Are the Land, deepens that understanding. It represents the physical quadrant of the medicine wheel and how we physically are a part of the land. And there is proof in that. There's science that backs it up. Our bones are made of the same minerals as the earth. Our breath is the same air that holds an eagle in the sky. Our blood is made of the same water that fills the lakes and the rivers and the streams. Our tears are made of the same water as the ocean. And to me, our fire is our spirit. That's like the thing that brings the rosiness to our cheeks. It's the light behind our eyes.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just to really deepen that understanding for children that they're a part of it, not separate.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful.
Mm.
Beautiful. Yeah. And I think it is so crucial to give that messaging and give those teachings, because there are so many kids who grow up without caregivers, or without that safe adult, or without those protectors. And so understanding that you always have that connection if you need it, if you want it, you don't need permission. It's a part of you,
Mhm.
is so, so beautiful and lovely.
Yeah,
So,
there's a word in Ojibwe, uh, it's mishkiki, and it
mm,
means medicine in English, but how it's used in our language, it means to draw strength from the earth. And when you understand that you're a part of the earth and the land, that word mishkiki makes you understand that you have the medicine you need in yourself as well.
mhm, mhm. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. I love that.
Mhm.
So, where can people find your book? Where can they purchase? Where can they follow you? Do you
Uh,
do online
yeah. Mhm.
yoga, like virtual, like
So there's lots of ways to work with me because I do so many things.
people wanted to connect? Yeah.
Yeah, so my first book, You Are Sacred, is available in most local bookstores. It can also be purchased directly from my publisher, Strong Nations. It's
Okay.
also recently become available in chapters, so that's pretty cool.
Mhm.
My second book is available for pre-order right now on Strong Nations website. You can follow me online. I'm not super active online. I've kind of moved away from being on social media just because it for myself, being online just feels like so inhuman just as of recently. But you can follow me, and I do talk about my books on there, and I'll share a few things on Instagram, Sarah Anna Liza. And then if
Mhm.
you want to work with me, there's lots of ways to work with me. I do speak in schools. I offer a lot of workshops for kids. So with each of my books, there's a workshop that is for children that is attached to it. So for You Are Sacred, there's a workshop where we do yoga and breath
Mhm.
work. I read my book, and then we do an art project that aligns with the element of that portion of the medicine wheel. So for You Are Sacred, the element is fire. So the workshop that I offer with that I'm really proud of this one. It's another way I've alchemized my anger into change. Is
Yeah.
last year when all the forest fires were happening, I was really affected by that.
Mhm.
So I decided to teach children about the sacredness of life and the cycle of life, and how to honor the spirit of the trees that have been lost to forest fires by going and collecting the wood burn from the forest and having
Mhm.
kids create art with the charcoal from
Oh,
the
awesome.
wood burn. So that's one of the things that I do. You Are the Land will have a workshop with it as well, but I haven't released it yet. And I
Yeah.
also do workshops for to teach people about the medicine wheel. I've kind of in the past few years, I don't like saying become an expert, but I've become really intimate with the teachings of the
Mhm.
medicine wheel. So I teach part workshop series on the medicine wheel that's really great for honestly everybody, but I
Mhm.
find it's particularly really beneficial for people in leadership positions to take, especially if you're working in Indigenous communities and you want to have a great understanding of our how we view wellness, and how we
Mhm.
balance the four parts of self, our emotions, our body, our mind, and our spirit.
Mhm.
And then it's all because I'm Ojibwe, it's through the Ojibwe medicine wheel. So
Mm-hmm.
that is a really great way to work with me is through that. I've taught it to teachers. I've taught it. I think it's also a great if you are a wellness provider
Mm-hmm.
who is interested in decolonizing your practice and understanding how to use your business to as a way of reconciliation, how to include the 94 calls to action in your business platform. That's a great workshop series. And then I also work with Indigenous communities doing a year-long program based around the medicine wheel that's aligned with everything. So I go out into an Indigenous community once a season and I teach how to take care of each part of self that's aligned with that season, because the medicine wheel also has the seasons involved in it. So for instance, I go out in the fall and teach how to take care of physical self, always through the lens of what I'm educated in, right? I'm a massage therapist, yoga teacher, breath work, and meditation guide. So it's always just through that lens. And I teach a online yoga series that is through the teachings of the grandfather teaching. So it's a 7-part or a 7-class yoga series, which each class focusing on one of the grandfather teachings. So love, wisdom, truth, honesty, bravery, and they always say the one that you forget is the one you need to work on most. Humility through the lens of yoga. So quite a few ways to work with me. And honestly, just if you ever are interested in anything, just reach out. I love collaboration. I love working with people. I love teaching people how to decolonize their relationship with wellness. So yeah, but those are probably the few key ways to work with me.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Yeah. Well, we'll link everything and we'll put it up so people can find you. And even as you talk through all of that, I'm like, I want to do every piece of that. It sounds awesome and incredible and full of wisdom. So thank you for being here and making
Thank you for
time. I
having
know
me.
your life is busy, busy, busy with 2 littles. So
One little, I have one little.
one little. I
Yeah,
thought you
4-year-old.
4-year-old.
Yeah.
Okay. In my
No, the
mind, you
other,
had a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old.
no, just a
Just a
4-year-old.
4-year-old. Okay.
I mean, he's got the energy of 2 children, so, so
2 for
sometimes I feel
1.
like I have 2.
Well, thank you. And thank you everyone for listening in. And if you want to follow up with Sarah Ann, we'll post everything so that you can find her and take part as an individual, as an adult, and maybe even your kids can participate in some of the activities and workshops offered. So thank you for listening in. Thank you for being here. And
Thanks for having me, Miigwech.
of course, our paths will cross again very soon. So,
Yeah,
yeah. All right. Have a good day.
me too.